he was telling me a bit about what's been happening to you. And then I looked more. We only talked about the most recent thing, but then I looked more at some of the stuff with your former university and things that went on there. They have really put you over the ringer in the last few years.
Yeah. I mean, basically, it started about 3 years ago. I published a book called Repatriation and Erasing the Past. And what this book was about was the problems that occur when you rebury bones, basically Native American bones that are used to study how to reconstruct the past and what people's lives were like in the past, but also to understand bone biology, to understand ways to practice ways to or improve ways on how to age and sex individuals that can then be cross-applied to forensics. And I basically take the position that we should not rebury remains.
That would be a good start for your studies.
And this is very controversial because there are laws that are for the repatriation and reburial of remains. The major one is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA. But there are also like state laws like CalNAGPRA. And the book that I wrote and then got published, it was published in 2020. We timed it for the 30-year anniversary of NAGPRA. So basically, I'm the co-author. I'm the lead author, but the co-author, my co-author, James W. Springer, is actually a retired attorney. So he's an anthropologist, but also a retired attorney. And so he covered in the book the legal aspects of it, the difficult part, and I just did the fun part, the bone stuff, right? And this book came out, and, most academic books don't cause any controversy. Actually, I would say that most academic books are not read by even other academics. But the book came out in September, and then or maybe October, so late September, early October, and by December, we had heard from our publishers, with University of Florida Press, that they were in crisis mode because there was a campaign to get the book depublished, otherwise known as censoring.
Yeah,
right?
literally.
And this was, they wrote in, the academics who wanted the book not to be published wrote an open letter against the book, calling it racist and saying that we had Victorian perspective and those kinds of things, anti-indigenous.
What do you mean by Victorian perspective?
Well, basically, perspective from the 1800s.
Yeah.
So I would consider myself then in good company since that was when Darwin was around.
Yeah.
But so basically just saying that we're antiquated in one way and that we didn't, that we were, I think the most scandalous thing to say in some ways is that they were calling us racists. And I couldn't quite understand that at the beginning because the book is not about race differences. It's about Native American skeletal remains and how those should not be buried.
Yeah.
And I actually take the line that any skeletal collection that has been excavated and is curated, so is preserved for research or teaching, should not be reburied, whether it's Native American, whether it's European. It's not for me to say that, I'm not saying that, these groups should be reburied, but another group shouldn't. I think that none of the groups should be.
Hey guys, from January 1st through January 24th, over 60% of those of you who have watched this channel are not subscribed. If you could take 2 seconds and smash that subscribe button, it is a huge, huge help to us in the algorithm, and it allows us to get great guests like this to come in from out of town to be here so that we can put out podcasts, which, by the way, we want to put out a lot more podcasts and a lot more content. And in order to do that, I have to up the budget, and I can't up the budget where we are right now financially. So seriously, if you take 2 seconds to hit that subscribe button, it's a huge help, and I appreciate all of you who have done that. And also like the video.
And so the open letter, it's kind of funny because when this started happening, I think my publishers were they were about to pull the book. I'm pretty sure they were about to pull the book.
Who was your publisher?
A University of Florida press. The book was peer-reviewed. So what that means is that there were anthropologists who read the book, anthropologists, archaeologists who read the book and approved it. Now, we had to make changes like you always have to make, but there was no, oh my goodness, you can't publish this type of moment during that process.
I don't understand why. I mean, as an archaeologist, the whole point is to dig up old things and study them. What were they claiming is the value of reburying the remains other than, oh, we want to give it back to those people because we took their land? Or was that it?
I think that's part of it. And I would say that this is a false equivalency for a couple reasons. So part of it is, the Native American tribes, the modern tribes, should be allowed to claim the skeletal remains and sacred artifacts like grave goods and rebury them or study them, but they don't have to rebury them. They could study them as well, and that because there's an ancestral link that they should get to make that decision. Now, the links are very very tenuous in a sense. Most Native American tribes are not clearly linked to any past collections that we hold. The ones where there was a clear link were basically repatriated and reburied very early on in the process. Basically, where there was clear historic documents or so forth, that those decisions had been made 30 years ago and done. So what's left now is the collections that are pre-contact, where we don't have a good indicator of who they were ancestral to.
What years approximately do you think they're from?
Well, like the collection that I looked at in San Jose, and so San Jose State University has one of the largest skeletal collections of a single site west of the Mississippi. And that collection is all pre-contact, so these individuals had never come into contact with Europeans. And it ranges from about 3,500 years old to about 300 years old. So, so it's a large range, right? So it's a collection the site had amassed the remains for many generations, right? It's not just one time period.
So it went all the way back to 3,500 years ago.
Yeah,
though. That's longer than I usually hear in America.
The oldest skeletal remains in the U.S. date from about 9,000 years, 9,000, 10,000 years. So like Kennewick Man is one of the most famous of what we call our Paleo-Indians, which are Native American remains or indigenous remains that date 7,500 or older.
Whoa.
And yet it seems that it doesn't matter how old these remains are, there's always a modern tribe who thinks that they are connected. And that's what happened with Kennewick Man. And so some people may say, well, you know what, why don't you do DNA studies? But DNA studies will not tell you whether the skeletal remains belong to any specific tribes. It will only tell you what kind of overall general population it would belong to, like Native American versus Siberian, right?
Really? I didn't know that.
And tribes themselves don't use DNA to determine who's in the tribe. They use what they call blood quantum a lot of times, which has nothing to do with blood, but rather is tracing family trees, right?
How reliable is that?
I think it's pretty reliable for recent,
right.
For a few generations. But I mean, there's lots of what we call pretendians, right? People who pretend to be Indians and they're not, and they get outed all the time.
Yeah.
One of the most famous, of course, is Sachin
Little Feather,
yeah. Right?
Yeah.
So
Isn't she the one who gave the speech for Brando
yes.
in '73 at the Oscars?
Yes.
Oh my God!
And I love
pull that up.
and I love Brando.
I'm an enormous fan. Look behind you, right there.
Yeah. So, but he was wrong. So
He was trying to do the right thing. It just didn't really work out. There's been a few of those. Oh my God, this one wasn't Indian. What was the name of the woman in Seattle who claimed that she was African American?
oh yes, Rachel Dolezal.
Yes, that's it.
Right.
I don't know why people do this stuff, but
Well, I think one of the reasons why they do it sometimes is because they actually get some benefit from it. So, there are, for example, scholarships that just go to Native Americans, right?
yeah, that's true.
So,
That's true.
Ironically, we had a whole genre of these films where men dressing up as females to get some benefit, right? The whole bosom buddy thing, or Some Like It Hot is about that. So it's, there is that. But yeah, so I ended up, my co-author, Jim, basically talked to the publishers with me and said, you're not going to pull this book. Given that he's now a retired attorney, he wasn't retired at the time, that probably worked in our favor. And basically, they didn't pull the book, but they sent out an apology letter for publishing it. And they said that they would try to, the classic apology, we'll try to do better next time.
We'll try to do better. We're glad we got to make money on this and put our authors through the ringer, but we'll be better.
Yeah. And so the other thing was that the open letter against the book had over 1,000 signatures, which is huge for an academic book. And I just know that most of those people didn't read the book, because had they read it, it would have been one of the best-selling, best-read books of the year in my field, right?
Yeah.
And
None of them read it.
And the other thing is that the letter came so quickly after it came out that it seemed unlikely that people had read it. And then, then people would sign it, and then a whole bunch of other people would sign it. Half of my department signed it, and all of the graduate students. So it was a huge thing. And so what basically ended up happening is I called the chair of my department to let him know. And he's like, oh yeah, I've seen some of this trouble. No worries. Thanks for keeping me up to date. And he acted sympathetic. But that was December 2020, I believe. Okay. Right? And when I applied for leave so that I wouldn't have to teach during the time I was working on the book, I had a book proposal that explained what I was going to write about, right? And my chair had to approve that proposal and write his comments. And he was like, oh, Elizabeth takes a very controversial perspective on the repatriation issue. We love her for it, type of thing, and say, this will bring the university, will have a national or international reputation, and, very positive. After it all blew up, he was not so positive at all.
Yeah, using the word controversial. When I hear that and I hear them leading with a word like controversial, that tells me it's going to point in the hedge direction if it goes wrong. Yeah. That's why I laugh when I heard that.
And so, I had been at San Jose State, and I'm actually still a professor there until May. Then I will retire. And I'll be professor emeritus, which is basically a status of a retired professor, so you still, have certain privileges there, but not. I'm not required to teach or things like that. Basically, what ended up happening is there were a couple other things that were bubbling away during this winter of 2020 to 2021, and of course, we get COVID around that time too, and so a couple things that ended up happening beyond the book was that I had a colleague another professor in the department who put out an email on the listserv that basically said that graduate students should use this database called Cite Black Authors to make sure that they cite Black authors for citational justice. And I sent a reply to that, very polite. And I said, I know this is well-intentioned. However, I recommend that students cite the authors who did the best work, regardless of their skin color. Something along those lines, right?
Very controversial.
Yes. So that was another thing that people were upset about. And then I went to a webinar for my university wanted to start a Native American Studies Center. And so I went to the webinar, and the speakers were, they were saying things that I would consider racist. For example, they said that in a Native American Studies Center, you should not, if at all possible, you should not have Hispanics in the office.
What?
Yeah, because those Hispanics, like a secretary, because they may be mistaken for Native American or vice versa.
Oh my God.
And so I said, well, why would that be bad if a Hispanic is mistaken for Native American, or if a Native American, or if a or vice versa, or if a Native American is mistaken for Hispanic. It's only bad if you think there's something wrong with being Hispanic. If you think there's something wrong with being Mexican, then it might be bad. But if you don't think there's anything wrong with Mexicans, it's not bad. Just like I have reddish hair. If somebody mistakes me for an Irish person, it doesn't upset me. Why would it? Right? It would only upset me if I think that there's something wrong with being Irish.
Right.
So
common sense opinion.
And so this ended up entailing a call from my chair telling me that I shouldn't attend such events, that these were echo chambers, and that although he agreed with me, he said, he thought I shouldn't attend them. And he said, he basically said, it could hurt the chances of the junior faculty's chances for tenure and promotion. And I said, I didn't believe that. And he's like, well, how would you feel if you were a junior faculty and this kind of controversy would come up? And I told him, I said, I would hope that I would be the type of faculty at any time in my career that would support people's freedom of speech and academic freedom.
Yes.
So that kind of passed. And then two other things happened.
This is like a laundry list. Oh my God.
And this is not even the most recent. Right? Two other things happened.
Can I say one thing before you say? I just want to keep everyone out there. We are going to talk all about your actual research today as well, and go through some cool history and stuff. I wanted to make sure at the beginning here you got to outline all this bullshit that has happened to you so that we get that on the table. But
Absolutely.
Please continue.
So the other things that happened was I wrote an op-ed for the Mercury News, which is the Bay Area's main newspaper, I should say, about the new laws for reburying bones, the CalNAGPRA's new laws. So the California Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And I said that CalNAGPRA was like the federal law, NAGPRA, but on steroids. Because the position is that if there's a different disagreement between the Native Americans' perspective and the scientist's perspective, you have to give deference to the Native Americans. And so it's not a balance, it's not a preponderance of evidence, it's basically, so what is the whole point of even debating anything then if you're just going to say, well, you are always wrong if you disagree with the other group.
That's the problem. Yeah.
And so when this op-ed came out, I had like a huge number of tweets about it, like negative tweets about it, from what I would call the pro-repatriation group. And it's kind of interesting. most of the tweets were very personal attacks. A lot of them were like, "Oh, you're a grave robber, ghoul," you know, you know, things like that. And then I posted a photo not too long afterwards. So what happened was of course, everybody had to leave the campus when COVID hit, right? And what happened was then we got to go back. And when I went back, I went into the curation facility that holds the skeletal remains to resume my work. And when I got back, after, I think it was it maybe 17 months or something? It was like some crazy length of time that we were gone, right? I was so happy to be back doing work. And like, one of the things is that I really love the study of anatomy, the study of skeletal remains. It brings me joy. And so I was curating the collection, taking care of the collection in the sense of making sure that, you know, the boxes were intact, the bags were good, that the bones were taken care of. And I opened one of the boxes, and there was one of the individuals that I had many times seen when I've done research. And I held the skull and I thought, wow, I'm so happy to be back here. And so I took a photo and I tweeted that photo and I said, so happy to be back with old friends. And that like exploded. And
Do we have that picture?
The provost basically, you know, called it disgusting. He said, oh, why was I holding the bones without gloves? Well, actually, the National Park Service, even, which is like one of the largest employers of archaeologists, says that you shouldn't use gloves unless like it's in a crime setting or something, right? Because, of course, if you have gloves on, you're more likely to drop the remains, right? So you're better off not holding it with gloves. You're better off holding it barehanded.
Didn't know that.
This is common practice. You can Google photos of anthropologists with skulls. You'll see lots of them with gloves and lots of them without gloves. It's not unusual at all. But they made a big deal about it. And basically then the president decided that she was going to change the protocols to access. And I was a curator of the collection, so that means I was the one to take care of them. And she basically removed me from that post, and then they changed the locks. They literally changed the locks of a curation facility, like in the middle.
So you couldn't even go in?
Yeah.
Do we have that picture, Alessi?
I think I saw it. It's that one, that first one.
This is it?
That one.
That's what caused the huge outrage.
Yeah.
God, people have too much time on their hands.
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you. That's crazy.
And so, and like anybody who looks at that picture, honestly, can see that that's a sincere smile. There's nothing.
Of course.
That's not fake.
What's the other one right here?
Oh, the other one is a photo that actually the university had used for their promotional materials for years.
So they weren't upset about that one.
No problem with that one or the other one. Yeah.
So stupid.
So, in a sense, they only started having problems with it after the book was published. And there's, the one below that too, where I'm holding it. I have my
no, over here, Alessi, on the right side.
On the right side.
On the right side, all the way. No, down. No. Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
Well, the big one.
Not
the
that
one.
Yeah.
That one. Yeah.
That one too, used in promotional materials for the university. Same picture, right?
Wow.
And so basically, because all this was happening, I started to be concerned that I would lose my job.
Of course.
And throughout the whole thing, I was always, I I was always civil. I was always, I always reached out to people to say, let's talk about this, and try to, basically be in a way, talk about it in a manner that is a civil manner to help people understand that the big reason why people were attacking me was not because of the photo, but because of the book.
Yep.
and the op-ed. Nevertheless, they basically changed the protocols to gain access to the collection and access to any of the collections. And that protocol read like a list of everything I hate. So, for example, you have to wear gloves. And if your glove is torn, you have to put on a new glove. You have to wear a mask.
For what?
For what? Oh, yeah, we're not going to give them COVID. Right?
Oh my God.
But then even more ridiculously, like, you cannot take photos. You cannot take photos of the boxes in which the bones are in. So, even if the box is closed, you can't take, yeah.
What about for record-keeping purposes?
Yeah, so no more photos. And then, unbelievably, they decided to also have some behavioral guidance that says you cannot cuss. You have to wear appropriate attire. And everybody knows when you say appropriate attire, you're talking about telling women what to wear. You're not talking about, like, so what, you can't go in there with shorts or a V-neck? Is a V-neck too risque to deal with bones?
The bones are going to be very, very offended,
Yeah. And then top it off, that they had a protocol that said menstruating personnel, they didn't even use the word woman, are not allowed in the curation facility or to handle bones.
Oh, my God.
And so when all this was happening, I basically had contacted Pacific Legal Foundation to get some legal help. And they basically helped me sue my university. There were other aspects, such as in the summer, before we I think it was before we returned, but sometimes timing is difficult when there's so much.
Right.
My chair, hosted by my dean, had held a webinar talk on what to do when your tenured colleague has been branded a racist. And they then changed the name. My chair then went ahead and told, the whole story from his perspective, and but changed my name so that people wouldn't be able to figure out. I'm the only person studying skeletal remains at San Jose State. So, and it's a small department. So anybody could have figured it out, like within 5 seconds of a Google search. But
And they're only calling you a racist, just to make sure I'm following here. They're only calling you that because you didn't want to repatriate.
Well, I think that's where it started. Yeah. Then they say I'm racist because I didn't like the citational justice part, right? So that's the other aspect, So there's the Cite
right.
Black
Yeah,
authors,
yes.
and then the Native American Studies Center.
Oh my God.
But they changed when my chair talked about it. He changed my name from Professor Weiss to Professor Jones, so to try to hide my identity.
How nice of him.
Yeah. So after and basically what he said during that talk was that what to do if you have this this evil in your department is to keep resources away from them and try to take them out of their class or out of their classes, and just kind of things like. At first he was like, no, I'm not worried about the classroom because Professor Jones doesn't teach her perspective in the classroom, doesn't use her materials in the classroom. And I do, of course. I teach both perspectives. That's how what a good professor does. I wouldn't say I'm an excellent professor, but I did try to keep things balanced. But basically, when he was challenged, they said, well, what about if Professor Jones decided to assign her book? And he said, well, yeah, then I might consider taking her out of a class. So when he said all this, that was basically the big jumping off point for this lawsuit. So that kind of triggered the biggest step in there. So along with all the stuff happening at my university, I was to give a talk at the Society for American Archaeology, which was online because of COVID. And this is the largest academic archaeology association or organization in the U.S. And so I had submitted an abstract and basically got accepted. And the abstract challenged the use of creation myths to make determinations on whether bones should go back. So most anthropologists would agree that you shouldn't use like the biblical creation myths to try to reconstruct what happened in the past. But they have no problem accepting creation myths from Native Americans. And so my perspective is that they're both creation myths, and neither should be used to determine what we can and cannot study. So after that talk ran, they did take it off the platform and issue an apology and basically said, we'll make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. So, so that was another aspect of it. So all of these things are happening within a fairly short period of time. In the meantime, I was desperate to get back into studying skeletal remains, and there was one collection. There was actually 3 things that I was trying to gain access to in order to rebuild my my scholarly or my research career. One of the things is animal bones. Non-human animal bones that are clearly not grave goods. So, like if you have a bird bone whistle that's buried with the individual, I would say that's a grave good. I'm not interested in that because that falls under NAGPRA. But the other animal bones, basically like the refuse, like the deer that they butchered to eat. And part of the reason why I was interested in gaining access to animal bones is that a lot of my research is actually about bone biology and not just specific to reconstructing the past. And so I figured I had a few ideas that I could use animal bones for as a substitute for human bones. Upon requesting those animal bones, which are not under NAGPRA or CalNAGPRA, which only deals with human remains and sacred artifacts, I was told that the tribe had decided that the animal bones, all animal bones, were sacred, and I would not be getting access to them. So basically, they decided that those were sacred, and unfortunately, when I was suing my university for access, the judge, I would say, misunderstood the law, and her understanding of deference to the tribe was that deference was to mean that everything they say goes, whereas basically deference even in CalNAGPRA, which I'm completely opposed to, but I can understand the nuance from it. Is that basically in relation to human remains and sacred artifacts. That doesn't mean that they can say everything is sacred. And the definition of sacred is something that you need. The definition in the law, I should say, is that it's something that would be needed for a religious ritual.
Did they say this? I just want to make sure I followed this part. Did they make this sacred remains claim about the animals as a result of you looking into it specifically, or had they already said it before and now we're just like reinforcing their little bullshit law?
They had never claimed that they were sacred before. It just came right after I asked for it.
There you go.
And then the other aspect was, so that was, strike one, sense, right?
I think we're on like strike 8 now, according to these people.
The other aspect was I asked for X-rays. Now, I've done X-ray and CT scan studies since 1997. So this is one area of my research, is looking at bones with X-rays and CT scans. And so a large amount of X-rays had been taken from these skeletal remains, and they're housed in the curation facility. They're housed in that room. And so I asked for access to the X-rays. And lo and behold, the X-rays are now sacred. Now, X-rays cannot be sacred because they didn't have X-rays in the past.
How many years?
And so they could not have been used in their traditional ancient rituals. But and Nick has his line is that if I had asked for a pencil, it would have turned sacred. That it didn't matter what I asked for. The third thing that I asked for was a collection from Carthage, Tunisia. And they actually did ask the tribe whether this collection was related to them, and the tribe said no. I think now, if they would ask them again, I have the feeling they probably would, realizing that they could get away with it, they probably would say yes, But they took, the university took 10 months to grant me access to the Carthage collection, looking for a way to keep me away. I finally did get access to it. But the Carthage collection, although it's kind of interesting because it's like 6th to 7th century Carthage, Tunisia, around the circus times of, the Byzantine circus, it's a very poorly preserved collection. And the reason why it's poorly preserved is twofold. One is that the soils are very sandy, and that's not good for bone preservation, because you get like the rains and then dry, and the rains dry is very bad for bone preservation. But they were in coffins, but the coffins had been opened because the site had been looted historically by Muslims. And so it's not a great, well-preserved collection. I was able to do a few studies on them, but, that was pretty much it.
Where was the collection housed?
In San Jose State.
Okay, it was there.
Because it was excavated by the anthropologist who was there before me, Bob Germain, in the early 80s, I believe, like 81 to 83 or so, I think. And the other collection, the large skeletal collection that I curated and did research on for, 18 years or so, the Ryan Mound, that prehistoric collection, it's beautifully preserved. It has over 300 individuals. The preservation is so beautiful that even like finger bones are preserved and toe bones. I mean, it's just a beautiful collection. And it's a real shame that it's not going to be able to help us reconstruct the past or understand humans anymore, because now it's off limits to everybody.
That is just absurd. And then your most recent one, I think what Nick was telling me about was you identified some remains as female. Is that right?
So,
and they tried to say that they didn't know that if they would identify that way.
Yeah. So this is one of the first things you do when you're doing skeletal studies is you try to figure out the age and sex of the individuals.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right? So male, females, and actually you do the sex before the age, because the sex sometimes determining the sex will affect how you age the individual, because there's some nuances of differences, how males and females age. And also, of course, females mature faster in the young years, but and that has a slight effect on what the age determination is. So you sex and age the skeletal remains. So there's males and females. the sex is binary, it's biological, all these things we've
You're
known.
going to get in trouble for saying that.
And so I was asked from a cultural anthropologist to, she's a cultural anthropologist and she also looks at sex differences. I was asked to be on a panel with her and 3 other anthropologists. So cultural, then and me, and I think there was one linguist, if I'm not wrong. So 5 of us all together, all females. That was the panelist, the person who created the panel, Kathleen Lowry. She's in the University of Alberta. That was her decision. It wasn't, I didn't even know that this was necessarily an intentional decision or not. But anyways, anthropology has far more females than males anyway. But 5 females from me from the US, her from Alberta, then 1 from Quebec, 1 from the UK, and 1 from Spain. So 3 languages, 4 countries, 5 females. And we all agreed that the panel should be on binary biological sex, but we had different perspectives on other aspects, right? So, for example, some of them are concerned about the sex gap between males and females in technology. I'm not so concerned about that, So, the idea was that the panel's title was Let's Talk About Sex, Baby. Biological sex is still an important analytical variable for anthropology, or something like that. And we submitted it. It got accepted to the panel. The American Anthropological Association was the conference. And they were holding the conference as a joint conference with the Canadian Anthropology Society and what we call the AAA, the American Anthropological Association. And this is so their annual conference. We submitted the panel with a description of the panel and each of our abstracts. So my abstract's title was No Bones About It. Skeletons are binary, or people may not be. I think that's what it was. And I talk about how anthropologists are very good at determining who is male and female by looking at the bones. I've done this on multiple collections. It's an important aspect to consider. And one of the things is a lot of my research revolved around trying to determine what people did in the past. So not only, biological differences, but activity differences. And there are traits that anthropologists have used to determine what people did in the past that always show up that the males are more robust or bigger. And we call some of these like muscle markers or entheses. So this is basically where a muscle literally attaches on your bone. And when you use that muscle, it will create a marker or a ridge on the bone. And the concept is that the more you use that muscle, the bigger the ridge is. But there are sex differences in how bone is deposited. And so if you and I were to do the same activity for the same length of time, and then you'd look at our bones, your bone would be more robust than mine, even if we did the exact same thing, because of the hormonal differences that occur. And so basically what was happening was there was this great focus on male activity and saying, oh, males were doing all this stuff, and ignoring female activity or downplaying it. And so my perspective was like, we have to understand the biological differences, or basically we're going to be always saying, well, males were doing more than females, right? So that
Seems
was
like a progressive idea.
It does, right? It was for a long time a progressive idea. So that was part of my my talk, and then the other part of it was about the importance of understanding sex differences for forensics. It's like if you find skeletal remains in a crime setting an anthropologist will go in there and determine whether it was male and female, if it's skeletal, right? And they learn this by looking at collections, right? You're trained in a human osteology class. And this is a basic thing to do, but we've gotten better and better at it. So pretty much throughout the pelvis is the best indicator of sex differences, which is not surprising because of childbirth.
Makes sense.
But almost the entire skeleton can be used to determine male and female differences. And if you use multiple traits, then you can get practically 100%. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at juveniles, because a lot of those sex differences don't come about on the bones until puberty, you can still use DNA, and you can be very, very accurate. So in a sense, this is obviously it's interesting to look at for past populations, but it's important to look at for forensic reasons, to be able to identify if somebody died, whether they were male or female, to be able to best identify who that person was, and then hopefully find the person who did the crime, mm-hmm. right? Bringing closure to those people's families and so forth. So I think that the problem when you say that sex is not binary is that you then think, okay, well, we don't have to improve our methods because anybody who we can't identify as male or female, and of course there will always be times when like you can't do the identification because the remains are not well enough preserved, and so we get better and better the more we study them, we could, improve our methods. But there will be people who are classified as unidentified, and this is just because we're not perfect with our methods. It's not because these people were trans or that sex is on a spectrum. And so I talk about that. And then I also, there's a misunderstanding, I would say, of disorders of sexual development, like individuals who have abnormal chromosome numbers, like XYY or XXY, or a missing one. And these are pathologies. They're birth defects. They're not another sex. It's an insult to people to say if you have, one of these things that you are some kind of intersex or some kind of in-between sex, or it's a pathology. And these people are...
a quick question on that. Are there medical... This is something I know a little less about, but is the term hermaphrodite, is there something medical where they do say, for example, you are, in very rare cases, you are technically born between the two?
Hermaphrodite is now called either intersex or disorders of sexual development. And the thing is that they sometimes, these kind of defects, abnormalities, they are basically, you can think of it as something's gone wrong, right? So like, for example, a female who has an enlarged clitoris that looks like a penis is still a female. She's not halfway to man. And so a male who has, who's born with undescended testicles, this is still a man, right? So
I see. Yeah.
Sometimes, if we're just looking at soft tissue, we might make a mistake. But the ability to either produce sperm, or to ovulate, is one of the main factors. That then controls all sorts of things. So it's not like there's only one thing that tells you it's male or female. And some things can go wrong. But we have 5 fingers on each hand. There are people who have 6 fingers, 7 fingers on these. We wouldn't say, oh, well, the normal human hand has between 5 and 7 fingers. We would just say that that's a birth defect.
Yeah.
Defects happen. So I think that people think, oh, that's mean. But it's not mean. It's just factual. And I actually think it's mean to not be factual.
It feels like in society, and it's got to drive people who are like you know, on the scientific or observational end of things nuts even more than the regular people like me. But it seems like in society, we have over-delted not hurting people's feelings so much that as a result, we're kind of hurting everybody's feelings.
Yeah.
Like it's like a circle and it's flipped back around to the other side.
Yeah. And so basically, and then I ended my talk with the argument that, you know, gender, which I would define as, and I think this is the definition that most anthropologists would have used as a definition up to about 5 years ago or so, right? As the expression of someone's femininity or masculinity, which can be, you know, in between, right? So I would say gender is on a spectrum. Most often, somebody's gender aligns with their sex. But there are people whose gender doesn't. And so one of the things that I talk about is that anthropologists, especially forensic anthropologists, should try to learn ways to identify whether somebody was transgendered, and specifically had they undergone feminization surgery, you know, which changes bones. Now
All the way back then?
No, modern day. So it's
okay.
forensics.
All right, yeah,
so
yeah.
forensics, for forensic collection.
I was thinking the same. I'm like, damn, they were really up to some shit back then.
No. And so just for the forensic samples. For the archaeological samples, I would say that you cannot make that determination, and you just have to stick to sex differences. And I think it's kind of insulting to assume that just because a woman is buried with a male artifact or an assumed male artifact, that she couldn't have been a normal woman. You know? Doesn't that just mean that maybe the sex roles weren't as strict as we had sometimes said? And there are some anthropologists who are making that argument that, you know, if you find a female with, you know, a sword, it means that there were women warriors. And so I think that that's a much more reasonable conclusion to draw than, oh, that individual was trans, when, you know, we cannot say that about people from hundreds of years ago. And it's kind of, it's really like ethnocentric to think that, like, using our own culture to put it back onto the others, right?
Yes.
Like, oh, well, you know, we have trans people now, so they must have always existed. Even like the term Two-Spirit, a Native American term to mean individuals who are both male and female, that term is new. It's from like 1990. It's a renewed term. These are new concepts. And so I do think that, now there were probably always people who sometimes felt like a gender dysphoria, you know. I mean, just like there are people who have other, you know, mental disorders or mental anxieties, or, you know, and I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know what percentage of those people there are and how those different disorders interrelate. But I think now that we do have sex feminization surgery, which doesn't change the sex, it just makes people look more feminine. It's up to the forensic anthropologists to see if they can then use that to identify whether somebody was a different gender. But that doesn't mean that we should abandon the term sex, and it's very different. So I thought this was all very... I thought it was all very politically correct, quite honestly. Yes. I thought, oh, this time around, I'm not being that controversial. Well, I was wrong. And so our panel was accepted in July, and then about end of September, we got an email basically saying, signed by the president of the American Anthropological Association and the Canadian Anthropology Society, saying that they're withdrawing our acceptance, that it's been rescinded because of the harm it will cause
to
the LGBTQ community.
There's a lot. There's pluses now and
Yeah.
minuses and things like that.
So this is the first time a panel has been rescinded in the whole 122-year history of the American Anthropological Association. Fortunately, Heterodox Academy, which is is where I'm at now. Heterodox Academy is an organization that's trying to get people to come back to civil disagreement as opposed to uncivil disagreement.
I like that.
And so their motto is great minds don't always think alike. And so Heterodox Academy has a Center for Academic Pluralism, which is basically, academic is some academics there, and we think differently or have different perspectives even within our group. And so their position is that, you make your case with evidence, you stay humble, you give people the benefit of the doubt, you be true to yourself. Those kinds of, that's like the heterodox way.
All good stuff.
All good stuff. And so they came in, and I'm there for the year as a faculty fellow, and they came in and said, look, we'll rescue this panel. They didn't use the term rescue, but that's what they did. And we'll put it on as a webinar.
Oh, wow.
And so it ran on November 8th, I believe. It was live streamed. We had 400 registered viewers, which is pretty good for an academic webinar, and over 2,000 live viewers otherwise.
Oh, cool.
So and I think it's probably about up to 4,000 views now. It's still on YouTube. And basically we all gave the talks that we would have given at the conference. It's still a shame. I mean, in a sense, it's still a shame that anthropologists are basically saying we don't want to debate it. We don't want a debate, and we're not letting you on to our conference. One of the interesting things is that then they when this hit the news media, mainstream media, most people, I would say, most of the reports were on our side. I would say we got favorable coverage, and the AAA basically did not reach out to any of us, any of the panelists, and then they put out a statement for journalists, and some of the other panelists were like, are we sure that this is really from the AAA? Maybe this is like a hoax or so, because it was so outrageous. They're doubling down in their examples. I believe, and I could be getting this wrong, but I believe they included things like to argue that sex is not binary, that some lizards can change their sex.
Oh, man.
So I was sure that it was the AAA because I was like, who else would take the time to write this, right? So, but we did get to present. I just think like if we abandon the concept of identifying sex, we've really lost a huge part of anthropology. Not only in forensics but archaeology. And then the other thing is many anthropologists are really important in medical research and biomedical research. So they teach anatomy, but also almost every university student will take at least one anthropology class because there's, in the U.S., because anthropology has so many GE, general education classes. And so, like, if anthropology decides that sex is on a spectrum, the science is settled, they said. Sex is on a spectrum.
Isn't that the best when they say the science is settled? As if we haven't disproven every goddamn thing anyone's ever come up with in science. Come on, man.
So the science is settled, sex is on the spectrum. They get to spread this narrative to almost everyone going into schools, which gets to spread to those people who are going to be teaching children. And I think that we need to, as anthropologists, need to understand the impact this has on people's lives.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Our Discord and Patreon links are in the description. We are starting to do AMAs on Discord, and we are also now releasing a new show called The Julian and Alessi Show with my producer, Alessi Alaman, on Patreon, along with some other exclusive content from episodes that we have been putting out on YouTube that are not seen on YouTube.
and like one of the things I'm interested in is seeing how transitioning, especially young transitioners, what effect that will have on their bones, because there's the jury is still out whether it will increase osteoporosis, whether it will, does it stunt growth in certain individuals, and all sorts of other things. I mean, I'm a bone person, so I'm interested in what it does to bones, but I've read like some quite scary stuff from other medical areas, such as, we don't know what it does to, when you stop puberty, we don't know what that does to a person's brain development.
Oh, yeah.
I would definitely be concerned about that if I was a parent.
Yes. Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here